On the night of December 29th, 2019, one of the most powerful men in the global car industry walked out of his house in Tokyo, put on a cap, a face mask, and a pair of sunglasses, and disappeared into the crowd. He was not going for a walk. He was escaping. This man had run 3 car companies simultaneously: Nissan, Renault, Mitsubishi. He had saved Japan's most iconic automaker from bankruptcy. He had been featured in a Japanese manga comic book as a hero. He had been mentioned as a potential president of Lebanon. He was worth over $120 million. He was on bail awaiting trial, and he was about to climb inside a box and smuggle himself out of Japan on a private jet. This is the story of Carlos Ghosn, the most powerful automotive executive on earth. How he rose from nothing, how he saved a dying empire, how he was arrested on a tarmac with no warning, and how he escaped Japan in a music equipment box in the most audacious prison break in corporate history. You genuinely cannot make this up. Let's start at the very beginning, because to understand the fall, you first have to understand just how high this man climbed. Carlos Ghosn was born on March 9, 1954, in Porto Velho, Brazil. His grandfather had emigrated from Lebanon to South America a generation earlier. His father worked for an airline. His mother was French. By the time Carlos was 6 years old, his mother moved the family back to Beirut, Lebanon, wanting her children to know their cultural roots. He grew up in Beirut, attended a prestigious Jesuit school, Collège Notre-Dame de Jean Hur, the same school that produced multiple Lebanese presidents. From there, he went to France, studied engineering at 2 of the most elite institutions in the world, the École Polytechnique and the École des Mines de Paris. Graduated in 1978. Here is a man who was born in Brazil, raised in Lebanon, educated in France, spoke 5 languages fluently: French, English, Arabic, Portuguese, and Japanese. He was never from one place, he was from everywhere, and that turned out to be his greatest weapon. In 1978, he joined Michelin, the tire company, started as a management trainee, rose fast. By 1985, at just 30 years old, he was running Michelin's entire Brazilian operation. The subsidiary was losing money. Ghosn restructured it, reorganized the finances, and within 2 years turned it from red to black. By 1989, Brazil was Michelin's most profitable division in the world. This was the first turnaround. There would be many more. He then moved to North America, overseeing Michelin's acquisition of Uniroyal Goodrich, the 4th largest tire company in the United States and the main supplier to General Motors. Another success, another country, another impossible situation made manageable. In 1996, Renault, France's iconic car company, hired him. He became Chief Operating Officer, and then, in 1999, everything changed. Nissan was dying. Not struggling, not having a difficult year, dying. The company had accumulated $20 billion in debt. It had reported losses for the previous 8 years. Only 3 of its 48 car models were generating any profit at all. The brand that had once been the pride of Japanese manufacturing was on its knees. Renault made a bold move. They acquired a 43% controlling stake in Nissan and sent their most feared executive to fix it. Carlos Ghosn arrived in Tokyo in June 1999 as Chief Operating Officer. Japan did not know what to do with him. He was the first non-Japanese president of a major Japanese car company. In a country that values conformity, consensus, and deep institutional loyalty, he was an outsider with a scalpel. He spent 3 months doing nothing but listening, studying, walking every factory floor, talking to every level of employee. And then he presented the Nissan Revival Plan. It was brutal. He announced the closure of 5 manufacturing plants. He cut 21,000 jobs, 14% of Nissan's entire global workforce. He broke apart the Keiretsu system, the web of supplier relationships that had defined Japanese corporate culture for decades. He sold off non-core assets, including Nissan's real estate holdings. He set a target of returning the company to profitability within 1 year. In Japan, this was not just controversial, it was almost sacrilegious. The Japanese press called him the coast killer. Protests were organized. Union leaders were furious. Many predicted he would destroy whatever was left of the company by tearing apart everything that made it Japanese. He did not care. He moved fast. He executed the plan with military precision. 18 months after arriving in Tokyo, Nissan posted a net profit of $2.7 billion. It had been recording losses the year before of $6.1 billion. In 18 months, that turnaround from a loss of $6.1 billion to a profit of $2.7 billion is one of the most dramatic financial reversals in the history of global business. Japan fell in love with him. The man they had called the coast killer became a national hero. Japanese women named him the most desirable husband in the country in a poll. A 160-page manga comic book was published, with Carlos Ghosn as the hero, saving Nissan like a superhero saving a city. He was discussed as a potential presidential candidate in Lebanon. He was invited to the World Economic Forum. He was profiled in every major business publication on Earth. And then Renault asked him to run both companies simultaneously. From 2005, Carlos Ghosn was the CEO of Nissan and the CEO of Renault at the same time. Two of the world's major car companies, one man running both. Then, in 2016, the Renault-Nissan Mitsubishi alliance acquired Mitsubishi Motors. Ghosn became chairman of Mitsubishi as well. The Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi alliance was producing nearly 10 million vehicles a year, competing with Toyota and Volkswagen for the title of the world's largest automotive group. He was flying 150,000 miles a year, managing 3 corporate cultures across 3 countries in 3 languages, arguably the most operationally complex job in the history of the car industry. And by most measures, he was doing it. But something was building under the surface. Inside Nissan, there was a growing tension, a quiet war. Renault owned 43% of Nissan. Nissan owned only 15% of Renault, with no voting rights. The relationship was unbalanced, and everyone knew it. Ghosn, who had saved Nissan and was effectively the face of both companies, was pushing for deeper integration between Renault and Nissan. Some within Nissan saw this as a threat, a French takeover dressed up in corporate language, a loss of Japanese independence. Ghosn himself has claimed that what happened next was not a criminal investigation, it was a boardroom coup. On November 19, 2018, Carlos Ghosn landed at Tokyo's Haneda airport on a private jet. Japanese prosecutors were waiting on the tarmac. He was arrested immediately. No warning, no prior indication. He was taken into custody and charged with underreporting his compensation to Japanese financial authorities. The accusation was that he had declared approximately 4.9 billion Japanese yen in salary over 5 years, roughly $44 million, when the actual amount was reportedly 9.3 billion yen, around $85 million. He had allegedly concealed more than $40 million in compensation. The same day, his longtime colleague, Greg Kelly, a senior American Nissan executive, was arrested on the same tarmac. Both men were taken away. Nissan's board met within hours, without Ghosn present, and by unanimous vote removed him as chairman immediately. Renault and the French government, who still owned 43% of Nissan, were furious. They initially stood by Ghosn, declaring him innocent until proven guilty. But the pressure became too great. In January 2019, Ghosn was forced to step down as chairman of Renault as well. The man who had run 3 car companies was now sitting in a Japanese detention cell. Japanese criminal justice works differently from most Western systems. The conviction rate in Japan is over 99%. Suspects can be held for up to 23 days for interrogation without formal charges. Then they can be rearrested, and the 23-day clock starts again. Ghosn was held for months. He later described conditions that shocked the international business community, including being questioned for 8 hours a day with no lawyer present. He was released on bail in March 2019, then rearrested in April 2019 on fresh charges, then released on bail again, this time for $13 million. He was placed under house arrest in a luxury Tokyo residence. Cameras watched every entrance. His passport was confiscated. His travel was restricted. He was not allowed to communicate freely with his wife, Carol. His lawyers had limited access to the evidence against him. In September 2019, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Nissan with fraud and separately charged both Ghosn and Kelly for concealing more than $140 million in retirement payments that had never been disclosed to shareholders. Ghosn denied everything. He insisted the compensation arrangements were legal. He insisted the prosecution was orchestrated by Nissan executives who feared his plans to more deeply integrate Renault and Nissan and wanted to stop him. And then, he decided he was not going to wait around for a Japanese court to decide his fate. December 28, 2019. Peter Taylor, the 27-year-old son of a former U.S. Army Green Beret named Michael Taylor, arrives in Tokyo. He meets Ghosn at the Grand Hyatt Tokyo Hotel. The plan is set. December 29th. Ghosn walks out of his Tokyo residence looking like an ordinary person. A cap, a face mask, sunglasses. No drama. He walks through the streets of Tokyo undetected and boards a bullet train to Osaka, Japan's fastest train, 2.5 hours to the other end of the country. In Osaka, he transfers to a hotel near the airport, and there, waiting for him, is a large black box, the kind used to transport musical instruments and audio equipment. There are air holes punched in it so he can breathe. He climbs inside. He later told the BBC, "When you get in the box, you do not think about the past. You do not think about the future. You just think about the moment." The box is loaded onto a vehicle. He is driven from the hotel to a private jet waiting at Kansai Airport in Osaka. The box is not X-rayed. It is loaded onto the plane. His helpers, Michael Taylor and Peter Taylor, the father and son who had helped him escape, passed through airport security normally and boarded separately. The airplane takes off at 11 p.m. He told the BBC that the 30 minutes waiting in the box on the plane, waiting for it to take off, was probably the longest wait he had ever experienced in his life. The plane flew to Istanbul, Turkey. In Istanbul, Ghosn transferred to a second private jet. That jet flew to Beirut, Lebanon. Ghosn arrived in the early hours of December 30, 2019. He issued a public statement the same day. He said he had fled Japan because he would not be held hostage by a rigged Japanese justice system where guilt is presumed, discrimination is rampant, and basic human rights are denied. Lebanon has no extradition treaty with Japan. Ghosn was free. The aftermath was extraordinary. In Lebanon, billboards went up across Beirut overnight. They read, "We are all Carlos Ghosn." The country treated him as a returning hero, a man who had been falsely persecuted by a foreign justice system. There were calls for him to run for president. In Japan, prosecutors were humiliated. They said in a public statement that it was easy for Ghosn to flee because of his wealth and power. Interpol issued a red notice requesting his arrest. Japan had no legal mechanism to bring him back. Lebanon was not going to hand him over. Michael Taylor and Peter Taylor, the father and son who had helped him escape, were arrested by U.S. Marshals in Massachusetts in May 2020. They fought extradition to Japan for months. Eventually, they were sent to Tokyo and stood trial. Michael Taylor, the former Green Beret, was sentenced to 2 years in Japanese prison. His son Peter received 1 year and 8 months. Prosecutors allege the tailors have been paid more than $1 million for their services, plus another $500,000 for legal fees. Greg Kelly, Ghosn's former colleague who had stayed in Japan to face trial, was found guilty on one count of financial misconduct covering the year 2017. He received a 6-month suspended sentence. He had been abandoned by Ghosn's escape to face the legal system alone. Nissan paid $15 million to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission in settlement. And Carlos Ghosn? He lives in Beirut, Lebanon. He gives interviews. He wrote a book. He has launched business initiatives to help Lebanon through its economic crisis. He consults. He travels. He appears at conferences. Interpol's red notice means he cannot travel to most countries that would extradite him to Japan. But Lebanon is his home, and Lebanon is not handing him over. Japan has never been able to put him on trial. So, who was Carlos Ghosn really? Hero or criminal? His defenders argue he was the victim of a corporate coup, that Nissan executives who opposed his merger plans fed information to Japanese prosecutors to destroy him, that the 99% conviction rate of Japan's justice system means any trial would have been a foregone conclusion, that the charges were carefully constructed to trap a man who had genuinely saved their company. His accusers argue the compensation was real, that the undisclosed payments were documented and deliberate, that other Nissan executives confirmed his knowledge of them, that the SEC's investigation, separate from the Japanese one, reached similar conclusions about concealed compensation, that a man who escaped in a box rather than face trial is not the behavior of an innocent man. What is not in dispute is this: Nissan was dying before he arrived. It is alive today partly because of what he did there. The Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi alliance he built produces millions of vehicles a year and employs hundreds of thousands of people. These are real things he built, and whether or not the allegations against him were true, the boardroom politics that surrounded his arrest were undeniably real. The speed with which Nissan's board removed him on the same day he was arrested, before any trial, before any verdict, before any due process, tells its own story. The truth of Carlos Ghosn contains both things simultaneously: a brilliant executive who saved a great company, a man who then used his unchecked power to quietly arrange financial benefits that were not disclosed as they should have been, and who was then destroyed by Japanese executives who feared what his ambitions for the company would mean for their power. The world will never know the full truth, because he is in Beirut and Japan is waiting. Here is what Carlos Ghosn teaches us. First, power without accountability is dangerous in any direction. When Nissan's board gave Ghosn the authority to set his own compensation, they removed the checks that should have existed. Whether he abused that or not, the structure was wrong from the beginning. Second, corporate politics can be as dangerous as any external threat. The people sitting in boardrooms with you can destroy you faster than any competitor, any regulator, or any market downturn. Ghosn spent 20 years building a global empire and was removed in a single day by a board vote he was not present for. Third, the justice systems of the world are not equal, and every global executive must understand the system they are operating in. Japan's 99% conviction rate, the ability to hold suspects for weeks without charge, interrogation for hours without legal representation. Ghosn understood this, which is why he fled. Whether that makes him guilty or smart depends entirely on which side of the argument you sit. Fourth, legacy and scandal can exist in the same story. Ghosn saved Nissan, that is true. Ghosn concealed compensation, that appears to also be true. History does not have to choose between these two things. Both can be real, and both are. And fifth, sometimes the most extraordinary stories in business are not about a company, they are about a man from Brazil, raised in Lebanon, educated in France, who spoke 5 languages, ran 3 car companies across 3 countries simultaneously, got arrested on a tarmac in Tokyo, and escaped Japan hidden inside a music equipment box in the dead of winter, and is sitting right now in Beirut, watching, waiting, untouchable. You cannot make this up, because the truth is always stranger.